When we say gladiator, we often picture a man being thrown into the arena every single day, where he either kills or dies. But the reality was more complicated. A gladiator was not just a doomed man waiting to die. He was an expensive, trained fighter, someone people invested money, time, food, doctors, equipment, and publicity into. People became gladiators in different ways. Some were brought in as prisoners of war. Others were sold as slaves. Some were criminals sentenced to the arena. But there were also volunteers, free men who signed contracts with the gladiator school themselves. Usually, these were poor men, debtors, former soldiers, or people who had lost their position in life. For them, the arena was a terrible but real chance. Food, housing, money, fame, and sometimes even freedom. But once a man became a gladiator, he lost his normal status. Even if he was technically free, society looked at him as someone from a dishonorable profession, roughly on the same level as actors, prostitutes, and other people who publicly put their bodies on display. The paradox was that gladiators were both despised and adored at the same time. People could see them as low-status men and still write their names on walls, talk about their victories, buy souvenirs with their images, and obsess over them. Ludus, the school behind closed doors. After entering the school, a gladiator did not immediately go out into the arena. He was sent to a ludus, a gladiator school. It was run by a lanista, the owner and manager of the fighters. This was the person who bought gladiators, trained them, rented them out to the organizers of games, and made money from their performances. The school was not some romantic warrior training camp. It was more like a mix between a barracks, a sports facility, and a prison. There were small rooms, a training yard, an armory, a kitchen, baths, and sometimes an infirmary. In some schools, archaeologists have even found punishment rooms, cramped cells where a person could not properly stand or lie down. A gladiator lived inside this system. He ate, slept, trained, recovered, and waited for his next performance. The age of entering the arena. It is hard to say exactly at what age gladiators began fighting. The Romans did not have one clear rule like, you can enter the arena at 16. For freeborn men in the early empire, there were restrictions. Young men under 25 were forbidden from appearing in the arena, but this applied specifically to freeborn men. Slaves, prisoners of war, and condemned criminals were much less protected by these rules. From the bones found in the gladiator cemetery at Ephesus, we can see that most of the dead were young men, roughly between 20 and 30 years old.
So the typical gladiator was not a boy and not an old man, but a young adult. Many of them probably began training in their late teens or around the age of 20, but they entered the arena only after serious preparation. Sometimes there were older fighters too. For example, the famous gladiator Flamma died at around 30 after fighting 34 bouts. Another gladiator, Marcus Antonius Niger, died at 38 and had 18 fights behind him. There were also men over 50 found near gladiator burials, but here we have to be careful. Such a person could have been a former gladiator, a trainer, or someone connected to the school, not necessarily an active fighter. Gladiator training. At first, a beginner was taught the basic movements. He did not train with a real sharp sword, but with wooden weapons. They were safer, but often heavier than real combat weapons, so they helped build strength and endurance. One of the main training tools was called the palus, a wooden post fixed into the ground. Gladiators practiced strikes, footwork, distance, turns, lunges, and defense on it. This was not chaotic, just swing your sword however you can. It was a real craft. A fighter had to know how to hold his shield, how not to get tired too early,
how to move in a heavy helmet, how to attack a protected opponent, and how to lose beautifully. That last part mattered too. A gladiator was not only supposed to fight, he was supposed to create a spectacle. If he lost, the crowd had to see not panic, but composure. Training was constant. It included weapon drills, working against the post, sparring with blunt or training weapons, running, jumping, working in protective gear, and strengthening the legs, shoulders, back, and grip. A gladiator had to endure not only the fight itself, but also heat, noise, fear, the weight of the helmet, lack of air, and the pressure of the crowd. Fighting style and role. Each type of gladiator had its own specialization. The Romans did not simply put two identical fighters against each other. They liked contrast, heavy against light, shield against net, sword against trident, defense against speed. That is why gladiators were divided by fighting styles and equipment. How did they choose a style for a specific gladiator? We do not have exact questionnaires from gladiator schools, but the logic is understandable. They looked at the body, height, strength, endurance, speed, reaction, character, and also at what kinds of fighters the school needed. A large and powerful man could be trained as a heavy shield fighter. A lighter, faster, more agile man could be trained as a retiarius or another mobile type of fighter. But this was not an absolute formula. The fighter mattered, but so did the market, what matchups organizers wanted, what types the audience liked, and what kinds of fighters the school lacked. Armor, weapons, and fighter types. The Murmillo was a heavy fighter. He carried a large rectangular shield, a short sword, and a massive helmet with a visor. This helmet protected the head, but limited vision and breathing. The Murmillo was almost like a tank. He pressured his opponent with defense, shield work, body weight, and close distance. The Secutor was close to the Murmillo, but he was often matched against the Retiarius. He had a smooth, closed helmet with small eye holes, designed so that the opponent's net would not catch on any protruding parts. His job was to chase down the lighter enemy, survive attacks from a distance, and force close combat. The Retiarius was almost the opposite. He did not wear a heavy helmet or much armor. His weapons were a net, a trident, and a dagger. He was more exposed and vulnerable, but faster. His image resembled a fisherman. Catch the opponent with the net, break his rhythm, keep distance with the trident, and finish him if the chance appeared. The Thracian, or Thraex, carried a small shield and a curved sword called a sika. This sword was useful for striking at unusual angles, for example, around an opponent's shield. This kind of fighter was often matched against a heavier opponent, so the audience could watch a clash between speed and defense. The Hoplomachus was inspired by the Greek hoplite warrior. He could use a spear, a small round shield, and a short blade. His fighting style was built around distance. Keep the opponent away, strike with the spear, and if the distance collapsed, switch to close combat. There were also rarer types. For example, the scissor, a gladiator with a metal tube on his arm and a crescent-shaped blade which could be used to cut the Retiarius's net. This shows how thought out the whole system was. The styles were not created randomly, but for spectacle and balance. One fighter had more armor, another had more speed. One had a shield, another had reach. One had protection, another had a risky but dramatic style. The gladiator diet. Interestingly, their diet was not like the usual image of meat for fighters. According to the analysis of bones from the gladiators of Ephesus, they ate a lot of plant-based food, grain, barley, and legumes. It is no coincidence that gladiators were called hoderi, barley men. This does not mean they were weak. That food gave them a lot of calories, mass, and endurance, and an extra layer of fat could even be useful. It did not make a person invulnerable, but it could slightly protect against shallow cuts. Their sports drink is especially interesting. After fights or heavy training, gladiators were probably given a drink made from plant or furnace ash. It sounds disgusting, but the logic was practical. Ash could be a source of minerals, especially calcium. Bone analysis showed an unusually high strontium to calcium ratio in gladiators, and one possible explanation is that they regularly drank this ash-based drink. You can imagine it as a rough, ancient Roman version of a mineral supplement after physical exertion, not tasty, but useful for bones and recovery. Fight frequency. Gladiators did not fight every day. This is one of the biggest myths. A good gladiator was too expensive to be thrown into deadly fights constantly. An ordinary, trained fighter might perform about once, twice, or 3 times a year. In some cases, more often, especially if the school traveled between cities and the fighter was not one of the most expensive ones. But for expensive and star gladiators, the frequency could be even lower. They were protected, carefully matched with worthy opponents, and brought out for major games. A gladiator's career did not necessarily include hundreds of fights. For many, even 10 fights was already a serious milestone. But there were exceptions. Flama fought 34 bouts, 21 victories, 9 draws, and 4 defeats, after which he was spared. There are mentions of veterans with dozens of fights, and in graffiti we even find the name of a fighter with an unbelievable 150 fights. But these were exceptions, not the average fate. Gladiator money. Money for gladiators was more complicated than it may seem. You cannot simply say, a gladiator had a salary. Most of them did not have a stable monthly wage like a soldier. The money came on several levels: a small prize for victory, gifts from the organizer or the public, and a large sum that the organizer of the games paid to the owner of the gladiator school for the fighter's appearance. Some reconstructions suggest that a winner could receive from 12 to 75 sesterces for a fight, but that was most likely not the gladiator's entire payment. It was a victory prize, a small bonus for winning. A much more important level of money was the cost of hiring a gladiator. In the late 2nd century AD, Roman authorities tried to limit the prices of gladiator games. In one such document, it is stated how much it could cost to hire a fighter for an organizer. Ordinary gladiators from the lower ranks could cost around 1,000 to 2,000 sesterces per appearance. Stronger and more valuable gladiators could cost 3, 5, 8, or 12,000. And the best, most spectacular, and most attractive gladiator could cost up to 15,000 sesterces for one appearance. But even here, there is an important correction. Those 15,000 were not necessarily the money the gladiator took home. Most of the sum went to the owner of the school. The fighter himself received a share. A free gladiator received about a quarter, and a slave received about a fifth. So, if an ordinary gladiator was hired for 1,000 sesterces, a free fighter could receive around 250, and a slave around 200. If a fighter was hired for 2,000, his share could be around 500 for a free man, or 400 for a slave. And if we are talking about a real star hired for 15,000, his personal share could be around 3,750 sesterces for a free gladiator, or around 3,000 for a slave. Favorites of the crowd. How did a gladiator become a crowd favorite? Not necessarily after a huge number of victories. Sometimes a few bright performances were enough. In Pompeii, there was a gladiator named Ludus, a Thracian, who had only 3 victories, but an inscription already called him the girls' favorite. So popularity could come quickly if a fighter was handsome, brave, dramatic, and memorable. The crowd did not love only winners. It loved style. A fighter had to move beautifully, take hits, avoid cowardice, avoid surrendering too early, respect the rules, and show character. If a gladiator lost but fought with dignity, the audience could ask for him to be spared. So sometimes defeat did not destroy a reputation. It could actually make a fighter even more beloved. Gladiators had fans. Their names were written on walls. Their victories were counted. They were shown on lamps, cups, mosaics, and drawings. Some spectators probably followed troops from city to city. In this sense, famous gladiators were closer to modern fighters, boxers, or rock stars than to faceless, doomed men from movies. Personal life and romances. They had a personal life too, although it depended on their status. If a gladiator was a slave and lived in the school, he could not simply go on dates freely, get married, and live an ordinary family life. His body, time, and movements were controlled by the owner. But that does not mean gladiators had no romances. Around the schools and arenas, there was a whole world. Servant women, vendors, female admirers, prostitutes, wives, partners, women who accompanied fighters or lived near them. In the sources, we find the word ludiae, women connected with the gladiator world, wives, girlfriends, companions. Archaeological and written evidence shows that some gladiators did have families. On tombstones, we find mentions of wives who dedicated monuments to their gladiator husbands. At the same time, romances with gladiators were something both attractive and scandalous for the Romans. A gladiator had low status, but he was physically strong, dangerous, famous, and forbidden. That is why ancient authors eagerly mocked women, especially noble women, who became infatuated with fighters. And Pompeian graffiti directly shows the sexual reputation of certain gladiators. Celidus was called the desire of the girls, and the Retiarius Crescens was called the girls' netter. So yes, gladiators who had not yet left the arena could have romances. But for a slave, this was not a normal, free, personal life. It was a life under control, dependence, and risk. Today, he's a women's favorite, and tomorrow he can be wounded, sold, moved to another city, or put against a stronger opponent. The fate of the defeated. In movies, it is often shown like this. If you lose, you die. In reality, defeat did not always mean death.
When a gladiator realized he could no longer continue, he could lower his weapon, fall to one knee, and raise a finger. This was a sign of surrender. After that, the winner was not supposed to kill him on his own. He waited for the decision of the organizer of the games. The crowd could shout, wave cloths, demand mercy or death. But the final word did not belong to the crowd. It belonged to the organizer, the editor. This could be a wealthy sponsor, a magistrate, or sometimes the emperor. He decided whether to give the defeated gladiator missio, meaning to let him leave alive, or to order him killed. The thumb gestures are a separate issue. The modern idea of thumbs down means kill, thumbs up means spare, is not as reliable as movies make it seem. Roman gestures did exist, but scholars still debate what the exact direction of the thumb meant. It is possible that a clenched or hidden thumb meant mercy, while an extended or turned thumb meant death.
But it is better to avoid the simple movie image of thumbs down. If the defeated gladiator was denied mercy, the winner killed him. And this too had a ritual element. A good gladiator was expected to die calmly, without begging, running away, or screaming. The ideal described in the sources is that the defeated man offered his throat or neck, and the winner struck a vital spot. For the Romans, this was part of the spectacle, not just death, but a demonstration of courage before death. Sometimes bodies were checked again after the fight. There were attendants in the arena who removed the dead. A body could be carried into a special room, stripped of armor, and checked to make sure the person was truly dead. But the important thing is this: the death of the defeated gladiator was not an automatic part of every fight. It depended on the era, the rules of the specific games, the quality of the fight, the mood of the audience, and the price of the gladiator. Reality versus the movies. First, gladiators did not fight every day. Most of the time, they trained, healed, ate, recovered, and waited for their next appearance. Second, most fights were not mandatory slaughter to the death. Especially in the early empire, expensive fighters were often protected. Death was real, but not inevitable. Third, it was not chaos. There were matchups, styles, rules, referees, assistants, replacement weapons, and control over the course of the fight. If a gladiator's sword broke, that did not necessarily mean he would be killed immediately. He could be given a new weapon.
Fourth, gladiators were not always miserable, faceless slaves. Yes, many were slaves and prisoners, but there were also volunteers, there were professionals, there were stars. There were men who were proud of their profession and wrote the number of their fights, victories, and weapon type on their tombstones. Fifth, the arena was not only sport and not only execution. On the same day, there could be animal hunts, executions of criminals, theatrical scenes, and only then gladiator fights. For a Roman spectator, this was a huge spectacle where death, politics, advertising, religion, and entertainment mixed into one. And finally, the phrase, "Those who are about to die salute you," was not the standard greeting of gladiators. It is known from a different context, a staged naval battle under Emperor Claudius. But movies turned it almost into the official slogan of the arena, even though ordinary gladiators most likely did not say it before every fight. Freedom after the arena. The most famous symbol of freedom was the ludus, a wooden sword. If a gladiator was given a ludus, it meant he no longer had to enter the arena. For a slave, this could mean becoming a free man. For a volunteer, it meant being released from his contract. But freedom did not always mean a beautiful ending. Some left and began ordinary lives. Some opened businesses. Some lived on their savings. Some returned to their families. But many remained in the gladiator world. A former fighter could become a trainer, an instructor, a referee, or an assistant in a school. He knew the craft. He knew the arena. And he could teach newcomers how to survive. Some even refused freedom or returned to the arena. The most famous example is Flammer. He was offered freedom several times, but he kept fighting. Why? Maybe because of fame, maybe because of money, maybe because after many years in the arena, another life simply no longer existed for him. The price of fame. This is the main tragic paradox of gladiators. Rome made them people of low status, but at the same time turned them into idols. They could be sold, punished, and forced to fight. But if they were strong, brave, and spectacular, the crowd chanted their names. A gladiator could be a slave and still become a celebrity. He could be despised and still be desired. He could receive freedom and still return to the arena. Because for Rome, a gladiator was not just a man with a sword. He was a living spectacle, expensive, dangerous, sexualized, humiliated, and glorified all at once.